Today, we will tell 3 amazing stories. Let's go. Story 1. When Diana realized it was too late to call, it was already past midnight. She silently prayed it was Marty's phone. Annoyed, she buried her face in the pillow and exhaled a grateful thank you when the call finally ended after 5 rings. Just as she started to get comfortable, the bell rang once more. Disappointed, she cried out in frustration and opened her eyes. "Martin, pick up the phone." Her words were suddenly interrupted. When she woke up, she noticed that her husband was not in their bed. Glancing at the clock, which showed 3:37 a.m., she reached for the phone on the bedside table, wondering at its disappearance. Just a few hours ago, he was by her side when they went to bed. Confused, she answered the phone, muttering, "Hello, who is this?" The voice on the other end asked, "Is this Diana Miller? Are you Martin Miller's wife?" "Yes, of course. Who am I talking to?" Diana asked. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling from the emergency department of the North City Medical Center. Your husband was in an accident and was delivered about an hour ago. We have your contact information from the previous incident. Can you come to the hospital right now?" The man on the other end of the line asked. "Oh my God, is he okay?" Diana exclaimed excitedly. "I can't tell you the details over the phone, ma'am. Please come as soon as possible," the sane voice replied. "Yes, of course, I will come as soon as possible," Diana replied. She hurried up the stairs where her daughter Dallas was fast asleep. Dallas, named after the city where she was conceived, studied at a local university but decided to live at home to cut costs. Although she enjoyed living in a dorm in her freshman year, she soon realized that living closer to campus would be more beneficial for her studies. "Dallas, wake up," she whispered, gently shaking her daughter by the shoulder. But Dallas was still fast asleep. "Dallas, wake up." Diana's voice broke through the haze of sleep. Dallas sat up abruptly, squinting against the harsh light in the room. Her mother's words slowly came back to her. "Your father was in an accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We have to go," Diana said. In a panic, Dallas threw back the blankets and jumped out of bed. She hastily pulled her nightgown over her head, ignoring the fact that she was standing naked in front of her mother. Diana was too busy getting out clothes for Dallas to notice. Dallas dressed quickly, anxiety for her father flashing through her mind. She followed her mother out of the room, her heart pounding with fear and uncertainty. After getting dressed, both women rushed to the hospital. Dallas kept asking her mother about what happened, but Diana couldn't find any answers. It seemed like the journey took forever, but in fact, with little traffic, it only took about 10 minutes. When they arrived, they were directed to Martin's room in the emergency department, where they were amazed by his appearance. He was heavily bandaged and did not react in any way to what was happening. Despite their grief, they were given papers to fill out. Even in times of grief, it is impossible to avoid bureaucratic procedures. Dallas pulled her chair closer to her father, seeking comfort in his presence. They sat in silence for about an hour before a man and a woman dressed in police uniforms entered the room. "Good evening, ma'am." The woman introduced herself, identifying herself as Officer Gail Stanton, with her partner Robert Hansen standing next to her. "We were the first to arrive at the scene. Is there any news about his condition?" Diana shook her head, her voice full of concern. "No one has told us anything yet, officer. This is my daughter Dallas." The officers exchanged glances and then turned back to the family. "We need to ask you a few questions," Officer Stanton said softly. "I understand that now is not the right time, but it is important for the investigation. Can you clarify what your husband was doing outside at that time?" The officer asked. "Actually, he was at home with me, and we went to bed around 10 p.m. I didn't know he was gone until I got a call from the hospital," Diana said. Officer Stanton asked Dallas, "Ma'am, can you confirm this?" "Yes, we watched a movie on TV, which ended at 10 o'clock, and then everyone went to bed. I saw Dad go into Mom's bedroom," she replied. "Do you know which movie you watched?" the officer asked. "We watched an action movie with Keanu Reeves," the daughter replied. "Did he have to overcome many personal problems, maybe financial difficulties or marital problems?" the officer asked. "The usual problems that arise in marriage, nothing unusual, but I was puzzled as to why he left the house without warning me." "Were the passengers of the other car injured?" Diana asked. "That's the point, Mrs. Miller. It was an isolated incident," he replied. "Two witnesses claim that your husband's car was working normally before inexplicably accelerating and crashing into a large oak tree at the intersection of Highways 121 and 288. There were no signs of an attempted braking," the officer said. Diana and Dallas were shocked by the officer's assumptions. "Are you suggesting that my husband deliberately caused this accident?" "We need to inspect the car for mechanical malfunctions that could have caused the accident and also talk to your husband when he regains consciousness. This is definitely a possible factor that we are considering. Are you sure there weren't any problems in the car that you should have talked about?" the officer asked. "I assure you, my husband and I have a strong and loving relationship. I can't remember a single problem that could have caused the accident. I think it's just the result of him losing control or maybe falling asleep, especially considering the late hour. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this," Diana replied. Diana's tears flowed uncontrollably, preventing her from finishing her sentence. Officer Stanton put one of her cards on the table, urging them to contact her if they remembered any additional information, and quietly left the hospital room. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room and turned to her mother with a questioning look. "You didn't tell them. What's the matter? What is it?" she asked. "No, Dallas, I didn't," her mother replied when her tears subsided. "This does not concern them and has nothing to do with the situation. Your father didn't mind. Maybe he'll bring it up when they talk to him. We can only wait and see." The following days dragged on for a very long time. Martin was still in a coma, hospitalized, and under the care of Diana and Dallas. They took turns keeping watch at his bedside, making sure that he was never left unattended. Diana contacted Martin's boss, explained the situation to him, and informed him about Martin's absence from work. The accident happened on Saturday evening, and it was only on Wednesday morning that Martin began to recover. By noon, his eyes had opened, although he still couldn't fully focus. Diana, who was next to him, noticed this change and went to his bed to calm him down. A minute later, a nurse burst into the room, alerted that the monitors showed that the patient was waking up. Diana moved away to give the nurse the opportunity to take care of Martin. Soon his condition began to improve. More doctors entered the room to assess Martin's condition. Seeing the free time, Diana slipped outside to call Dallas and inform her about her father's awakening. Although Dallas didn't respond, Diana left a voicemail with the news. When they began to take away the medical equipment, it turned out that Martin's left arm was broken. Although being right-handed, it did not interfere too much. In addition, his throat was irritated by the tube, so the medical staff provided him with a communication board. The nurse read the message and asked if he was sure. Martin nodded. The nurse hurried out into the hallway while the tests continued. "Mrs. Miller, I regret to inform you that your husband has asked that you and your daughter not be allowed to enter his room," she said. Mrs. Miller was stunned and exclaimed, "What? He's my husband. I have every right to be with him." "I understand, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes come first," the nurse explained. "Please let me talk to him. We can sort this out." Diana tried to squeeze past the nurse, but to no avail. In desperation, she had to scream, "Martin, please talk to me. What's going on?" she screamed. The nurse interrupted her, scolding her for interfering with other patients. "Mrs. Miller, please stop shouting. If you want, you can wait outside the ward, but if you try to enter or make noise, you will be asked to leave the building. Do you understand?" Diana nodded understandingly, realizing that she had no choice but to comply. 45 minutes later, Dallas arrived at the hospital and saw her mother sitting on a chair at the entrance to the ward. Confused, she asked, "Mom, why are you here? Why did Dad forbid us to enter the ward?" The mother hesitated before replying. "Well, he forbade me, but I don't understand why he forbade you, and why did it take you so long to get here?" Dallas explained, "I just woke up when Bradley came to check on me. Instead of being with your father, you decided to make love to your boyfriend. I understand that he was unconscious when you left, but it still shows what your priorities are," Diana said threateningly. Dallas replied in an indifferent tone, not at all remorseful for her action. She justified her decision by saying that she needed to relax after a stressful situation, and it worked. She advised her mother to also find time to relax in this way, but the mother categorically refused this offer, saying that it was not something she would have done. She also stated that now is not the time to discuss this issue, as it is disrespectful. Dallas couldn't help but laugh at the irony of the situation. A tall, stunning brunette appeared at the knock on the door, dressed professionally but not like a doctor. Despite this, her badge identified her as Dr. Lasser, a mental health specialist at the hospital. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she greeted him. "How are you feeling?" "I think as good as expected. It's been 9 days since the accident." He finally found the ability to speak. The outdated board was no longer used. He asked about the date of his discharge, but did not receive a clear answer. "Despite this, the hospital asked me to talk to you. Is this acceptable?" the doctor asked. "Do I have a say in this matter?" he asked. "Not if you want to be discharged as soon as possible. In order for you to leave, I have to discharge you," the psychiatrist replied with a puzzled grin. "Then let's get started." Dr. Lasser pulled a chair up to the bed and sat down, elegantly crossing her long legs. After a few minutes of looking through the papers, the doctor spoke. "So it looks like you were hospitalized a little over a week ago after an accident with a large tree. I also noticed that you asked your wife and daughter not to visit you, and this leads me to believe that there may be some connection between these two events." Martin nodded back. "She cheated on me," he confessed. The nurse sighed, acknowledging that infidelity unfortunately is common but rarely leads to such extreme measures. "Is there anything else in this story?" "What is it?" she asked. Martin sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity. The last thing he wanted to do was open up about his feelings, especially to a beautiful woman like Dr. Lasser. He wished he had an older male therapist he could trust, but Dr. Lasser remained calm and understanding, giving him a chance to collect his thoughts. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Martin found the courage to speak. "I think I was depressed," he admitted quietly. "There was no official diagnosis, but I just felt good, probably lost. I haven't had the desire to engage in intimacy for over a year," Martin said. "It all started after that incident, right?" the doctor asked. She probably knew about his medical history. She probably had access to all the records. She just wanted him to admit it, to tell the truth. "It wasn't even an accident. I was a passenger in the back seat when we were hit from behind. My boss was in the front passenger seat, and his boss was driving. There were no airbags to protect us," he began. "I didn't expect to get such severe damage, but unfortunately, it happened. I accidentally hit my head on the seat in front of me, which I believe was the cause of the injury. According to the report, I received a blow to the head and a slight concussion. Despite numerous tests and medications, the doctors were unable to give a clear explanation for my condition. It seems that a part of my brain has been damaged, as a result of which I cannot achieve arousal. In general, my wife became dissatisfied with our intimate life, which eventually led to her having an affair. This situation had been wearing me out for 7 or 8 months before the events of that evening happened. We tried to solve our problems in other ways, but in the end, it wasn't enough. I know that there are certain types of assistants who can help in situations like this. I've already had the experience of intimacy, although I admit I'm a little embarrassed to talk about it. At first, we hoped that everything would work out and fantasized about spending the whole weekend in bed together, enjoying each other's company. Unfortunately, this never happened. In the end, she began to seek satisfaction elsewhere without telling me in advance. I only found out about it when I unexpectedly returned from work ahead of time. It may seem like a platitude, but it was a shocking revelation. She was at home not only with her lover but also with my daughter and her boyfriend. There was disbelief in Dr. Lasser's voice when she asked, "Did they do this together?" Fortunately, no. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I found out about my wife's infidelity, and that my daughter was aware of it, and didn't seem to mind it, he replied. "That was the reason you forbade your daughter from visiting you, right?" she asked. "Yes. Oh, and if I haven't mentioned it before, Bill is Brad's father. We met him by chance as the father of our daughter's boyfriend. Later it turned out that it was our daughter who recommended Bill to her mother. This revelation came as a surprise to me. Have I discussed this situation with them? Not quite. I was thinking of approaching Diana, but I have already witnessed more of my daughter's personal life than I would like, so I decided to leave." The explanation that followed was not at all what I expected, he said. She regretted that I was aware of the situation, but stressed that if I could not meet her needs, then she would have to look for a permanent partner. She preferred to have someone by her side all the time rather than being in constant search of a new partner. Bill, who was single and had similar needs, became her chosen one. What could I do in response? Indeed, I couldn't give her what she needed in terms of physical intimacy. It wasn't her fault, and she was just doing what was necessary for her own well-being. If she had hypothetically asked you about it beforehand, would you have answered yes? The doctor asked. I've been thinking about this question for a long time, torn between my love for her and my own happiness. In the end, I realized that I couldn't go through with it. We made vows and promises, including a commitment to support each other in sickness and in health. I couldn't betray her, and I couldn't accept the thought that she would do the same to me, he replied. Despite this, did she continue to date him? The doctor asked. Now that I found out about it, she turned out to be less restrained. I can't say for sure if she started doing it more often because I didn't know how often it happened before, but it used to happen only during the day when I was at work. Now that includes weekend shopping, some of which she obviously spent with Bill, he replied. It must have been difficult. The doctor asked knowingly. It doesn't even come close to describing the situation, and yet I felt powerless to do anything. She deserved a full-fledged intimate life, he replied. But I couldn't handle it. The weight of it was suffocating me. Let me tell you about the evening of the accident. The whole family gathered to watch a movie on TV. I tried to hide my heartache by keeping her locked up. It seemed to me that it was better not to burden Diana and Dallas with their worries. As they exchanged kisses and hugs before going to bed, I received a simple good night from Dallas. At that moment, I realized that she had lost all respect for me as a father and a man. It was hard to blame her for such actions, considering that I didn't think too highly of myself either. Like Diana, I went to bed as usual. The monotony of what was happening was almost suffocating. Every evening, everything happened the same way. As soon as Diana fell asleep, I dressed quietly, took my wallet and keys, and went upstairs to check on Dallas. When I saw that she was sleeping peacefully, I kissed her and said goodbye, and then went to the car. As I got into the driver's seat, I couldn't help but notice the airbags, a reminder that there is protective equipment in the car. I believed that if the blow was strong enough, nothing would change. I didn't have a definite plan. I just drove aimlessly around the neighborhood. When I first came across a large oak tree, I noticed the absence of obstacles and a clear path. After circling around it once more, I headed towards it. The man finished his story. They sat in silence for a few moments, each replaying his story in his head. Finally, the doctor broke the silence. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your openness and honesty with me. This is quite unusual. I'll give you time to think about what you've shared with me. Is it okay if I come tomorrow?" the doctor asked. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied with a touch of sarcasm. They shook hands, and Dr. Lasser left the room. Martin took his phone, which he had left at home earlier in the evening, and which Diana had kindly brought to him despite his protests, and replied to numerous messages and emails. He also informed his boss about the latest developments. Finally, he closed his eyes and tried to rest for a while. When Diana returned home, she tried her best to keep her composure. She couldn't shake the feeling that Marty didn't mind her meeting Bill, as if he allowed it as a sign of his love for her. At first, Diana considered what had happened to be a simple accident, but as doubts crept into her soul, her confidence wavered. She was afraid that the authorities might question her husband, fearing that he would reveal details of her relationship with Bill. The police did not contact her again, deciding that extramarital contact was technically not a crime. Perhaps they decided it was an accident and closed the case. Anyway, she didn't care. And if there was, she couldn't remember. And she certainly wasn't going to refrain from physical intimacy just because someone had falsely accused her husband's boss. This was not the life she had agreed to, and she certainly wasn't going to agree to it right now. When Martin returned home, she decided that she would be more attentive to his feelings and more restrained in dealing with Bill, but she wasn't going to give up. The next morning, Dr. Lasser came as promised. Martin noted the changes in the doctor's appearance, but unfortunately, Marty remained withdrawn. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller?" Dr. Lasser asked. "Nothing has changed since yesterday, doctor. I'm ready to go home, but it looks like the decision is in your hands," Martin said. "Well, at least partially. Unfortunately, according to state law, you must be detained for 72 hours. The countdown started with yesterday's conversation, so we have a couple more days, but the food here is not too terrible." They giggled together. "I'm glad to see that you don't lose your sense of humor," she remarked. "Me too," came the reply. "It has been quite a long time, or rather several months, since I really felt like myself. I used to be quite a joker and often got on Dallas's nerves with my antics," he replied. "Have you had any disturbing thoughts lately? Maybe there are some hidden dark corners in your mind that we have yet to explore," the doctor asked. "You see, Doc, everything has changed. I've been struggling with feelings of depression for a year now, but recently those feelings have changed. Now, instead of sadness, I am filled with anger and disappointment. I feel that Diana and Dallas have let me down, especially Diana. But first of all, I am disappointed in myself for not showing self-control and not letting my wife know that her behavior is unacceptable. Will I take a position now? Definitely. Although the idea of divorce is very tempting, I am aware of my role in making it happen. If she agrees to end her relationship with Bill, I am ready to go to a psychologist and work on restoring our marriage," he said. "I have to pay tribute to your tenacity, Mr. Miller. It is not often that I witness such an amazing transformation in such a short period of time," the doctor noted. "During the time that I spent here lying down before our meeting, I had enough opportunities to reflect on my thoughts. I am grateful for the chance you gave me to share them with someone, which allowed me to clarify and organize my thoughts," he replied. "Your behavior in this situation was truly outstanding, Mr. Miller. That's why I decided to end our conversation for today. I'll drop by tomorrow for a final conversation, but I don't see any reason why you can't leave as planned," she concluded. "I can't wait for this, Doc," he replied. Marty knew that if he wanted change, he had to start by acting like change was inevitable. The airbags proved to be extremely effective and exceeded Marty's expectations. The most difficult aspect of the accident was the concussion he received, which required a long rest in a dark, quiet room. Turning off the TV and turning on calm music, Marty's wife and daughter surrounded him with care and attention. Everything went smoothly for a little over a week until Diana suddenly announced that she needed to go shopping. "No," Martin replied calmly. "What do you mean no?" Diana asked in disbelief. "There are basic necessities, including your healing creams, Make a list for Dallas to go in your place, Marty ordered. Why are you dragging me into this, Dad? I already have plans for a meeting with Bradley, Dallas protested. Well then, you have extra motivation to make purchases faster, don't you? Marty replied. When Diana reluctantly started making a list, he added, This is hilarious, Martin. You can't just barge in here and disrupt everything. Dallas and I have our own rules, and only I go to the store, period. Do you really think I'm naive, Diana? He asked. Knave? No, Marty, that's not what I meant. Why are you suddenly doubting me? She asked indignantly. Do you really think I don't understand that these grocery shopping trips are just an excuse to see Bill? He sarcastically remarked. I've never come home without groceries yet, Martin. Never, Diana replied angrily. Of course, it's a great alibi, but you've been away too long, and I see right through you, Martin summed up. When you avoid looking me in the eye, when your outfits don't seem right to you, when your makeup looks a little wrong, it means that something has changed, he said. The time spent with Bill was a thing of the past, and Diana's shocked expression only emphasized this fact. At that moment, Dallas couldn't help but feel a newfound respect for her father. Marty, please, we've already talked about this, she pleaded. I will try to be more careful in the future. I think I was being too casual, but I'm not going to let that stop me. I have every right to a full-fledged intimate life, and I intend to lead it, Diana exclaimed. Don't our marriage vows mean anything to you? Each other in sickness and in health. Leaving others is not an option when faced with difficulties, Martin said. And yet you're here, preferring to date someone else. It's time to make a choice. Either you end your relationship with Bill and work on our marriage with a psychologist, or on Monday, I turn to a divorce lawyer, he said threateningly. You have no right to suggest such a thing, Martin Miller. Don't even think about threatening me. If only I could have intimacy with you and no one else, Diana screamed. It's unfair to accuse me of something I have nothing to do with. Just because you had an accident doesn't mean that my love life should be ruined. I refuse to accept it. Instead, I'm going to go shopping, meet Bill, and attend to my own needs. If you want to discuss it tonight, we can, but don't try to control or limit my actions, she said. Saying this to her husband, Diana ran out of the house, slamming the door with such force that the windows shook. The silence that followed was disturbing. Father and daughter exchanged worried glances, after which Martin retired to his room. Dallas Miller was worried about the future of her family, in particular about her parents' marriage. Her father had never come into conflict with her mother, and although disagreements between them were not uncommon, nothing seemed so serious. Deciding to leave this matter between her parents, Dallas felt a sense of anxiety creep into her soul for the first time in her life. Unable to do anything, she gathered her thoughts and headed for Bradley. Part of Diana secretly wished that Marty would never fully recover because she wasn't sure she could let Bill go. Bill was domineering and dominating, qualities that didn't quite suit her. He acted without hesitation, unlike Marty, who was always a gentle and caring person. At dusk, Dallas returned home and found her father resting in his room. A dim light coming through the slightly ajar bathroom door caught her attention. It dawned on her that her father must have turned on the light because none of the lamps in the room were so dim. "Dad," she whispered. He had his back to her, but he answered without turning around. "Dad, I'm really sorry." Her words seemed to pierce his thoughts as he slowly sat up in bed and finally met the gaze of his daughter, who was crying quietly in the doorway. "What do you want to say? What is it?" he asked, confused. He stopped using the affectionate nicknames he usually called her after he found out that she had helped her mother find a new partner. Even if she was crying, he didn't dare to do it now, feeling like it was all a trap. Dallas came over and stood at the foot of the bed, apologizing for her actions. She explained that she was just trying to help her mother, who was upset about his situation. Their gazes locked for a moment, confirming each other's unspoken understanding. Bradley's father was grieving the loss of Mrs. Coy. Bradley confessed to them that he constantly thinks about her and longs for her presence. It was natural to assume that they would be able to find solace in each other's company, but at that moment, it dawned on them they had never thought about how their actions would affect another person. Wasn't that the reason for their actions that night? Marty was stunned by his daughter's unexpected reaction. He couldn't help but wonder if this was all just a ruse, but decided to take her word for it. If he is eventually caught off guard again, insulted or betrayed, he will have to put up with it. But deep down he felt relieved. He struggled with his own emotions, unable to do what he desperately wanted to do. When their eyes met and they exchanged fleeting smiles, Marty assured his daughter that the past was behind them. He swore that he would never allow himself to be plunged into this darkness again. I really hope so. I'm relying on you. Are you thinking about leaving Mom? Dallas asked. I haven't made a final decision yet, dear, but it seems inevitable if she doesn't break up with Bill. Let's keep this between us. She has to change on her own, not because she is forced to. Martin asked. Okay, Dad, I'm going upstairs. Oh, I broke off my relationship with Bradley today. Marty tried his best to hide a smile. He had never approved of this guy, and it was amazing to hear that she had fallen out of love with him. Why? Marty asked, intrigued by the sudden confession. Dallas started to explain, but then hesitated, searching for the right words. Because my dad once told me that Bradley wasn't good enough for me, and now I see that he was right. I realized that my father was right in many ways. A grin spread across Marty's face when he saw his daughter growing up in front of his eyes. Dallas walked up to her father and hugged him tightly in a moment of awareness and gratitude. It dawned on them that these hugs were the first in a long time. Eventually, they let go of each other, exchanging smiles, and Marty watched as Dallas quietly left the room and headed upstairs. As soon as Marty heard the click with which the door closed from the outside, the warm feelings that had gripped him disappeared. He lay down again, closing his eyes. Soon, Diana came into the bedroom, having taken a shower at Bill's. Marty advised her to come back after the shower so she wouldn't smell like another man. Can you help with the groceries? She asked. Marty jokingly replied, Are there any products there at all? Yes, Marty. I told you I was going to go grocery shopping, and I went, she replied. Marty took the bags out of the car and put them on the table, noticing that there were no chilled or frozen foods in them. He found a receipt with a timestamp indicating that she had left the store almost 2 hours ago. Marty realized that she had been shopping before meeting Bill. Despite the fact that he had expected this, the evidence he saw still amazed him. He silently put away his things and retired to the bedroom, wondering if it was worth investigating the situation. Diana had made her plans clear, and now he had to decide what to do. Something had to be changed. Do you want to discuss this further? His wife asked. It was obvious from her tone that she did not believe that this would change anything. No, Diana, you've made your position clear, he replied. Diana gave up. She treasured her husband and did not want to lose him. He was not only her spouse, but also the closest person she loved to spend time with the most. Given the circumstances, she did not think that seeking her own intimate satisfaction was the right decision. Diana knew there was going to be a problem, and she wanted Marty to come to his senses and see it too. She nodded in satisfaction and went to the closet to choose an outfit. She was thinking about resuming intimacy with the husband she missed so much, but today was not the right time. When she was getting ready for bed, Marty was already asleep, or at least that's what she thought. Diana was furious when the divorce papers were filed. Marty, being prudent, sent them home and stayed with Dallas, staying in the guest room upstairs next to Dallas's room. Despite the fact that Diana was against the divorce, Marty hired a fierce lawyer who put a lot of effort into defending his interests. Anticipating Diana's next move, Marty took precautions and decided to be prepared for any further attempts on her part. The consultations began the same week the paperwork was filed, and Marty turned to a reputable psychologist. The psychologist confirmed that Marty was no longer at risk, and the judge agreed with him. The quarrel could have continued, but Dallas intervened just in time to prevent Diana from causing even more harm. Dallas reminded her mother that Diana's needs should not be above the vows and promises she made. Life is not always fair, but sometimes the right things went out. She had to support her husband and endure his suffering by his side. Dallas stressed that any further resistance would permanently destroy their potential mother-daughter relationship. Diana, faced with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, was forced to abandon her objections to the divorce. Their house was sold, and Marty agreed to pay child support for several years, hoping that the court would appoint them regardless. Diana found a 2-bedroom apartment near her work and moved into it. After the divorce was finalized, 8 months later, Martin was able to work full-time, but the bitterness of the divorce remained. Bill made it clear that his relationship with Diana was over. It turned out that he had several other women, which made Diana lose her attractiveness now that she was no longer married. Dallas continued to split time between both parents while attending college. Over time, Diana began to pose as a victim and continued to blame Marty for the divorce. Once again, Dallas heard from her mother that if only Marty had been more understanding. She raised her voice at her mother, doubting that she was thinking about their father's feelings. Marty entered the dimly lit club around 10 o'clock on Friday evening, seeking to escape from the confined space of his house. He was just looking for a brief moment of pleasure. After ordering a rum and coke at the bar, he looked around the room and noticed a woman at the opposite end who seemed familiar to him, but he could not remember where he had seen her before. She was sitting with an almost empty glass of wine in front of her, her dark brown hair cascading down her back. Her dress was revealing, barely covering her breasts. Marty studied her carefully, and memories came flooding back. A smile played on his lips as he raised his glass and walked towards her. As he approached her, she raised her head and met his gaze. "Dr. Lasser?" he asked uncertainly. She looked into his eyes and studied his face for a while before showing signs of recognition. Marty began to doubt himself, wondering if he had mistaken her for someone else. "I'm leaving Dr. Lasser in the hospital. In the real world, my name is Vicky," she replied. "It's been a long time, and I'm sure you communicate with more patients than I do with experienced psychologists," he joked. "I remember names better than faces," she replied. "Well, my name is Martin Miller," he said. Vicky thought about that name for a moment while Marty waited for her to admit defeat. He was watching her closely. He could have sworn he saw a spark light up in her mind. "Ah, Mr. Miller, an unfaithful wife, and a sudden encounter with a tree, if I remember correctly." "You remember correctly, and I'm surprised. We only talked a couple of times almost 2 years ago." "What a coincidence. Would you like to join me?" Marty motioned for the bartender to pour them another glass. "Thank you. I'm glad you're here. What brings you here tonight? Are you dating someone?" she asked. Marty asked, "Are you still married?" "I'm trying to get married," Vicky replied with a twinkle in her eyes, hinting at her true intentions. Marty raised an eyebrow. "But I could swear that not so long ago I saw an amazing ring on your finger," Vicky sighed. "Maybe it was there once. My divorce has recently been finalized. I wore rings in a vain attempt to save my marriage, but it was clear that my ex-husband had other interests, for example, a young cashier and her friends." "And how are things in your marriage?" Vicky asked. "I'm sorry to say that I failed," Marty replied. "God, are they still a couple?" she asked. "This may shock you, but I haven't followed my wife's relationship since the divorce. I have no idea," he replied. "And please, call me Martin. Anything but Mr. Miller," he begged, laughing. "What did your wife call you?" Vicky asked. "Marty or Martin," he replied. "Would you like to dance?" Martin asked, asking the bartender to keep an eye on their drinks. Taking Vicky by a hand, he led her to the dance floor, where they quickly found their rhythm to the cheerful music. When one fast song was replaced by a slower melody, they continued to dance, clinging to each other. Vicky put her arms around Martin's neck, and he held her tightly to him, swaying to the beat of the music. As a man, Martin couldn't help but notice the lack of a bra as soon as he saw Vicky. Their eyes met for a moment before she rested her head on his shoulder. They remained in each other's arms when the second song began. Martin was fascinated by the feeling of intimacy with this stunning, fragrant woman. When the song ended, Vicky took advantage of the lull to express her feelings. "Martin, I'm tired of dancing, but I also feel incredibly lonely," she whispered softly in his ear. "Why don't you take me home and do something about it?" Martin gently took her hand and led her back to the bar, paid the bill, and informed the bartender that the drinks were over. The bartender, not at all embarrassed, nodded understandingly. Since she arrived at the club in an Uber, they got to Martin's car, and he drove them back to his apartment. When they were seated, Martin asked, "Vicky, I know it's a little late to ask, but how much have you had to drink?" She replied, "Just one glass of wine at the bar before you arrive. What's on your mind?" "Don't worry, Martin," she whispered. He drove into the underground garage and took the elevator to his floor. Vicky snuggled up to him all the time, and they shared a few passionate kisses. As soon as the door closed, Vicky quickly took off her dress, exposing herself. "Oh my God, Vicky, you look amazing," Martin exclaimed. "Thanks, Martin, but are you going to just stand there and watch?" "No way. I'm not here just to watch," he told Vicky with a mischievous smile. "But first, show me your bedroom," she asked. Martin took her hand and led her down the hall, grateful that Dallas had gone to her mother's for the weekend. "Do you have any contraceptives?" Vicky asked when they entered his room. Martin nodded, took out a small supply from the bedside drawer, and put them on the bedside table. After more than an hour of intense and passionate lovemaking, they finally returned to reality. Martin was lying on his back, and Vicky was curled up next to him, feeling full and satisfied. They did not fall asleep completely, but were in a state of relaxation, suspended between sleep and wakefulness. Martin felt Vicky lift her head. "Martin," she whispered. "Yes," he muttered as soon as he woke up. "I just remembered that this story mentioned a problem with making love. Do you remember that?" Martin laughed softly. "Oh yeah, now it's not a problem." Vicky's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Martin explained. "A few months after the tree incident, I started to feel, well, different. The tingling sensation is the best I can describe. I think these are the feelings that arise when a paralyzed limb begins to come to its senses. This feeling lasted for several weeks. Despite the fact that we were still technically married, my wife and I had been living separately for some time. I did not consider it necessary to explain the situation to her since it did not concern her. Over time, I began to experience morning cravings more often, sometimes even during the day," he said. "After 8 to 9 months, everything returned to normal." The doctors did not have a clear answer on how to explain the sudden improvement. Despite numerous tests and scans, they were unable to identify the specific cause of the changes. In the end, they decided it was a mysterious brain quirk. Maybe hitting a tree somehow fixed the situation. The truth remains unclear. It could have been a combination of a blow and the natural healing process of the brain. The exact reason may never be fully understood, he concluded. Then I consider myself lucky. "I think it's okay if I stay the night?" Vicky asked. "So we're planning to get intimate again in the morning and then have breakfast together?" Martin asked. When they were ready to rest, Martin asked one last question. "Vicky, do you think you're ready for a serious relationship?" There was silence, and Martin worried that he might have made a mistake and scared her. He half expected her to get out of bed and ask for a ride home, but there was no doubt about her attraction to him. It wasn't just her looks that attracted him. She had a sharp mind, and he found her company pleasant. It wasn't love yet, but after the divorce, she became the first woman he truly considered. "Can we discuss this in the morning?" she asked. "Of course. Good night, Vicky." "Good night, Martin." Vicky woke up before Martin, and saw that he was sleeping peacefully. Deciding to let him sleep it off, she took a shower and then went to the kitchen to cook breakfast. Martin's question caught her off guard as she was getting ready for bed, although she was definitely attracted to him. The main thing for her was just to have fun. For several months now, she had been telling herself that she was quite happy with the absence of a romantic partner, and in many ways, it was true. With a steady job and friends, she didn't necessarily need a man, but deep down, she couldn't deny that she really wanted to communicate. But what would a decent man say when she told him the truth? Martin woke up to the smell of something delicious. He went into the kitchen and saw Vicky in the shirt he had worn the day before and an apron. "I was going to make you breakfast," she said. "It's too late," Martin replied with a smile. "Well, you can invite me to lunch instead," Vicky told him. "Take a quick shower, and breakfast will be ready when you return." 10 minutes later, Martin joined her in the kitchen while she was arranging the plates on the table. An omelette, several sausages, and a slice of buttered toast appeared. "I didn't know there were sausages in the freezer," Marty replied, laughing. "I was hoping they could still be eaten," Vicky jokingly said. Martin tasted a piece and said it was very tasty. Breakfast was relatively quiet. Martin tidied up the kitchen while Vicky kindly cooked. They made small talk until they finished eating and loaded everything into the dishwasher. He looked at Vicky and asked, "Are you ready to talk?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mostly." "Listen, Vicky," he began. "I don't want to complicate the situation or invade your privacy. If you only want a physical relationship, I'll understand. You don't owe me anything." She nodded in agreement. "I just need to talk to you about something. Can we do this in the bedroom? I feel calmer there." They intertwined their fingers and went into the bedroom, where they sat opposite each other on the bed. Vicky squeezed Martin's hands tightly. "Martin, despite the fact that we met in person only last night, I already consider you a wonderful person, and I really like you. But I have to tell you something important," she began. "I told you that my husband left me for a younger woman, and it's true. But the real reason he left is that I can't have children. He wanted to have his own family and didn't want to consider adoption. That's why he left in search of someone who could give him the desired children. He considered the absence of his own children to be a manifestation of inadequacy, and me to be its cause. As for his feelings after the divorce, I can't say for sure," Vicky finished sadly. "I'm already over 40. I have an adult daughter, so having children is not a hindrance for me," Martin replied. "It's nice to hear that. I also want to be honest about what I'm not proud of. After the divorce, I was overcome by a feeling of self-doubt. I was getting old, and my husband had just left me for a woman almost half my age." Vicky began to explain. "I'm 37 years old if you're interested," she said cheerfully. The thought crossed his mind, but he never brought it up. They both laughed a little. "I also felt a sense of incompleteness, if that makes sense. To be honest, I didn't feel like a real woman. How could I be considered a woman if I couldn't bear children? I understand the skepticism, but that's how I really felt at that moment. And then I decided to prove my femininity," Vicky continued. "If I couldn't satisfy my desire to have children, I decided to satisfy my desire to please men, often strangers. I adopted the image of a femme fatale and never refused an invitation to go home with someone who interested me. This went on for several months until I realized that it was harmful and sought help from a psychotherapist. Despite this, I continued to behave in this way, although not so often, until I reached a tipping point when I was able to free myself from it." "Have you been doing something like this?" she asked. He tried not to make any judgments and did not want her to feel judged too. But last night, she was undoubtedly as alert as a cougar. It was a fact. "As a woman, I have needs, and sometimes I go outside to satisfy them. But now I have become pickier in my choices," she explained. "There were many times when I returned home alone and took the situation into my own hands," she said. "I suppose I should be grateful that I meet your standards," Martin said. Martin, I really appreciate the time we spent together, and I appreciate your honesty. I would like to continue our relationship, but I want to be honest about my past experiences. I have recently been tested, and fortunately, all the results were negative. Currently, I do not use contraceptives, but if necessary, I can provide a certificate from my doctor. I think it would be nice for both of us to get tested and commit to being the only one for each other, Vicky said, and the words flew out of her mouth in a hurry. Martin sat in thoughtful silence for a few moments, making Vicky feel anxious and at the same time hopeful for his answer. We are becoming more and more familiar, and it can be difficult to open up to someone new. But I decided to take a chance and open myself up. I am grateful that I did this, because now I have found a person who truly understands me and makes me happy. Thank you for sharing your story with me, Vicky. It helped me understand that I am not alone in my difficulties and that there is hope for a bright future, Martin replied. Many women experience a decrease in interest in sexual intercourse and prefer asexual forms of attachment. I thought that I would have to look for a woman much older than myself or wait a few years to find someone who would share my desires. When my libido recovered and everything seemed to be back to normal, I still didn't feel the best. I felt pressure to prove my masculinity by pursuing women for physical intimacy, he candidly shared. I used to have a pretty high opinion of myself and considered myself quite a ladies' man. I was no more selective than anyone else. I've had a lot of women. I've had casual relationships without much thought. But in the end, my luck ran out when I caught an unpleasant illness and had to admit to the doctor that I didn't even know the names of my intimate partners. While undergoing therapy, I began to think about my actions and behavior, he continued. I haven't had an intimate relationship with a woman without protection for a long time, but I'm ready to take the test and commit to being the only one, he finished. Well, shall we try? Vicky asked, blinking her eyes as she already knew the answer. I'm sure we'll try, Martin replied to her rhetorical question. By lunchtime, Martin had run out of protective equipment. The expected meeting with Diana occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Vicky and Dallas had a strong relationship, and they got along great. Although Marty and Vicky had their own house, they practically lived together, and it was clear to everyone that marriage was not far off. They decided to go to a club designed for a more adult audience, where a DJ played tunes, and the atmosphere was conducive to intimate conversations at tables. Martin and Vicky chatted animatedly while sipping drinks and enjoying each other's company. The evening started off just fine. Vicky was surprised when Martin's smile disappeared, and his gaze shifted to her curiously. She followed his gaze and saw Diana approaching their table. Martin's expression turned neutral as Diana's face lit up with a grin. Despite the passage of time, Diana still retained the bitterness of their divorce and was sure that she had done nothing wrong. The fact that she satisfied her intimate needs with another man when her husband couldn't satisfy them didn't make her feel guilty. Therefore, when she approached the table, her intentions were far from friendly. Marty, I'm so glad to see you, Diana said, sarcasm in her tone. Diana, this is Vicky. Vicky, Diana is my ex-wife. Martin reluctantly introduced them, wishing he didn't have to do this. Nice to meet you, Diana, Vicky said. I must admit, I haven't heard anything about you, Vicky replied politely. Diana's response was full of bitterness as she reminded him of their previous divorce. Yes, we got divorced. It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern, Martin stated firmly, hinting that she should leave them alone. Diana quickly apologized, admitting that she didn't want to interrupt their date. But then she added, Vicky, I have to tell you something. What? Vicky asked, looking at Martin, and then returning her attention to Diana. I would not recommend that you continue to communicate with him. We broke up because he couldn't satisfy me in bed anymore. Martin stared at Vicky, waiting for her answer. Vicky stifled a laugh and raised her eyebrows at Martin in disbelief. Is it true? You've never talked about it, she asked. Martin just shrugged, letting Vicky take the lead in their conversation. Diana believed that she had managed to destroy Marty's relationship as he had destroyed it with Bill. She was sure she had the upper hand, but her joy was fleeting. Remembering a recent meeting, she realized that what she had mistaken for a wish was actually something completely different. Her smile faded quickly when she saw Vicky and Martin exchange knowing glances. Diana was left perplexed by this turn of events. "Wait, what's she saying, Marty? Are you saying this damn thing really works?" Diana exclaimed. It turned out that Dallas kept Martin's personal life a secret from her mother during their chance meetings. Diana, as always, took the news like a champion. "But how is this even possible? Have the doctors finally found a cure?" she asked in disbelief. Martin and Vicky were silent, watching Diana's growing agitation. "Come on, Marty. This question caused the collapse of my marriage." Diana could not calm down. "I think I deserve an explanation of what went wrong," Diana demanded. Martin's smile faded. "Diana, it was your actions that led to the breakdown of our marriage, not my condition. You made a decision that eventually led to the breakup of our relationship, and as for what I do now that we're divorced, that's my business. You have no right to judge or demand answers from me. Yes, you can point your finger and say that my choice played a role in our breakup, but I wouldn't behave like this if things were different." "Diana, something unexpected has happened. The doctors believe that all the problems that I had after the first accident just need time to heal. If you had been patient and supported me during my illness, as our vows promised, we would still be together," Marty said. Diana was speechless, stunned by such a revelation. "I can't believe it. Maybe it's a gift from God," she whispered. Martin shook his head. "He just wants us to keep our vows," he said quietly. Diana's eyes sparkled as she asked, "Do you think so now?" Martin hesitated before replying, "No way. I absolutely don't think so." Diana's expression softened, and Marty asked, "Could you leave us alone for the rest of the evening?" After a moment's thought, Diana met Martin's gaze and confessed, "You were right, Marty. I made a mistake. I was selfish and I didn't have the foresight. I should have been more persistent. I ruined a happy marriage. I deeply regret my actions." Diana hurried away, leaving the table behind. Martin and Vicky watched her disappear from sight, and a feeling of pity died in their hearts. Martin then turned his attention to Vicky. "Shall we dance, my love?" They also watched as Diana spent the whole evening looking for a companion for the night. At the end of the evening, she left with a gray-haired man who was clearly 15 years older than Diana. It was clear that Diana was having a promiscuous sex life. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky exchanged vows and tied the knot. Dallas had to deal with Diana's paternal problems. As it turned out, Diana was diagnosed with breast cancer, which greatly worried Dallas. Of course, Marty comforted his daughter in the hope that everything would be fine with Diana. But deep down, he realized that this was karma that befell a lying and evil woman. Story 2. My name is Tom, and my beautiful wife is Linda. At 165 pounds, I may not be the biggest guy, but I have my advantages. We first met as students. I was 23 and she was 21, while getting a double degree in economics and accounting. I served in the Army at the same time. Linda, on the other hand, got a degree in biology. Although my military service did not always bring me to areas of intense combat, it was still fraught with danger. Our unit was assigned to single missions, which added an additional level of risk to our responsibilities. We often had to punish those who tried to feign friendship. In fact, we were the security forces. My experience was in strategy development and hand-to-hand combat. By the age of 25, I had completed my studies, after which I left the Army. 2 years later, I married Linda. We had 2 daughters in 4 years. I carried out my professional duties from the comfort of my home, supervised the financial affairs of various local businesses, and was engaged in sales. Linda, on the other hand, devoted herself to taking care of our children. But as our marriage crossed the 10-year mark, she became more and more preoccupied with various obligations. She got a job at a nearby laboratory associated with the university. Since both of our daughters were in school and I was working from home, she was able to return to her favorite job. We lived in the same house I grew up in, and which now belonged to me after I bought it from my parents when I was in college. Performing various military tasks, our unit received a reward, which we divided into 10 equal parts, providing me with the funds necessary to make the necessary purchases. At the end of February, my neighbors and I planned to go to dinner and dance at the club. There were 8 of us, and we agreed with the nanny that she would look after the children at night. Linda and I decided to book a room at the hotel adjacent to the dance club. She looked amazing that evening, -5'6", tall, slim figure, wearing a beautiful blue silk dress. We were enjoying a delicious dinner and dancing merrily in the club when suddenly a group of 6 people appeared. A tall blonde man named Mark Stevens attracted the attention of all the women at our table. He was a professional midfielder for the local team, and he was accompanied by a charming blonde with a noticeable wedding ring. They danced together, as a result of which our friend June told us that she was a cheerleader for the team and was engaged to Stevens. As the evening wore on, Stevens started glancing at our table and eventually headed towards us. He asked Linda to dance without looking into her eyes. When I tried to stop her by putting my hand on her shoulder, she just got up from the table and went with him. She didn't even look back at me, and I felt upset. My irritation increased when during a fast dance, Linda easily moved into Mark's arms for a slow dance. I got up and walked past them to the bar. The women at our table didn't approve of what I did, but I did it anyway, knowing that Linda didn't seem to care much about it. I was sitting at the bar, sipping coffee, and didn't notice how they finished their slow dance. Linda returned to her table, and I stayed where I was, watching her look around the room until her gaze settled on me. A hint of concern flashed across her face as she took a seat next to June. I walked over to them, forcing both women to stand up. "Did you like it?" I asked, feeling a little regret that I hadn't joined them. "I'm sorry if I seemed strange to you," I added. June calmed me down. "It was just a random dance, nothing to worry about, Tom." "It seemed insulting to me," I muttered, sitting down in an armchair. Linda announced, "June and I are going to the ladies' room. We'll be back soon." They left, leaving me. Mark left too, but without the blonde. June returned alone. "Where's Linda?" I asked. She replied, "Linda is no longer here. She left with Mark." Shocked, I rushed outside just in time to see Linda get into a red Escalade and drive away. When I returned to the table, June was engrossed in conversation with the others. "Did you all know what she was doing?" I asked June in a slightly accusing tone. "Tom, you have to leave her overnight. She'll come back to you tomorrow," she insisted, but I was firm in my answer. "No, I don't need her to come back. Tell her about it when you talk to her." My statement caused a wave of disbelief and protest at the table. It seemed that everyone had decided that I was too harsh. Pleased with their reaction, I snapped back. "I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. You all knew, but no one bothered to warn me. Maybe I can step in and stop her from making that mistake now. She's risking losing everything for one night of passion." As I approached the reception desk, I noticed a blonde woman sitting at a table with a group that had arrived with Stevens. She seemed to be crying. I went up to her and asked if she was his girlfriend. She confirmed that she was but is no longer. Curious, I inquired about their whereabouts, and she informed me that they had gone to their house on Cherry Lane. She said he promised never to cheat as soon as they got engaged, which made the situation even more heartbreaking. "Excuse me, was this woman your wife?" the blonde asked. "Was" is the main word in my question. He said he would finish with her in the morning and then take her home. She replied with tears in her eyes. He seemed to enjoy showing off his conquest. The other 2 men seemed offended by his behavior. I didn't pay any attention to them. I handed her my business card and asked her to contact me. She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. I left, taking my coat but leaving Linda's coat. Leaving Linda's suitcase, I took mine and left the hotel. As I drove home, memories of past military experiences flashed through my mind, reminding me how important it is to have a plan. Regretting that I hadn't thought about it before Linda left, I parked the car in the garage, activated the security system, and took out a long-forgotten rope from the basement. Determined, I climbed the stairs, ready to put my plan into action. I undressed and started running up to the second floor. I took with me black underwear, a hoodie, dark gray sweatpants, worn sneakers, and 2 pairs of gloves. I also did not forget to take a balaclava. After changing my clothes, I went to the attic with a rope in my hands. I tied it securely to a beam, as I did when I was a child, and climbed out through a narrow window. I carefully climbed down the side of the house. Once on the other side, I saw only a dense forest. Without hesitation, I ran to it and easily jumped over the side fence, going down the path to the workshop. I entered it and packed a backpack with spare wool socks, a penknife, and an old hand axe hidden in my toolbox. After packing everything in my backpack, I got on my bike and started pedaling towards the river, driving through a dense forest along the way. After crossing the bridge spanning the river, I continued driving towards Cherry Lane. On the way, I noticed a house decorated with a statue of a football player and a red Escalade parked in front of it. Armed with an axe and a knife, I jumped over the fence and raced to the parked SUV. With a quick swing of the axe, I smashed the passenger side window, setting off the alarm. Hiding behind a post on the porch, I waited for my target. Soon, the porch light came on, and the door creaked open. Taking advantage of the opportunity, I hit an unsuspecting man on the head when he went outside, armed with a semi-automatic pistol. He fell to the ground, dazed and disoriented, and I watched as he tried to crawl away. I delivered a powerful blow with both hands. After that, I quickly closed the front door behind me and then turned and ran away. After jumping over the stone wall, I returned to my motorcycle. I packed my things, including the axe, knife, gloves, and shoes, into a backpack and zipped it up. Having gathered everything I needed, I jumped into the saddle and rode to the river. When I reached the bridge, I stopped and threw my backpack as far as possible into the river, watching it disappear into the distance. It had rained the day before, and the current was swift. I rode up to the house on my bike, making my way to the workshop through the nearby forest. When I entered the house, I took off my socks and changed them for fresh ones. I washed the handles and pedals of the bike with an ammonia solution and wiped them thoroughly. After that, I ran outside, jumped over the fence, and climbed onto the roof of the house. It turned out to be more difficult than expected, but I successfully climbed through a small window. I pulled the rope and tied it up. I wiped the windowsill with a rag, then took the rope and headed to the basement. I took off all my clothes, as well as my mask and gloves, throwing them into the washing machine. After a thorough shower in the basement bathroom, I washed everything twice. When I was done, I changed into gym shorts and went back upstairs, leaving the basement door ajar to warn that the washing cycle was over. I changed into the clothes I had worn to the club the night before and went to the basement to put them in the dryer. While they were drying, I went back upstairs, made some snacks, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat down for a moment, thinking about the events of the previous night. When the dryer buzzed, signaling that the clothes were ready, I took them back upstairs and carefully put everything in its place. The balaclava, as always, was in its place at the back of the closet. Looking at my watch, I saw that it was already 2:50 am. As soon as I entered the house after leaving the club at midnight, I went downstairs and settled on the couch with a glass of whiskey. The next moment, I was already dozing. I was suddenly woken up by the sound of the doorbell at 6:02 am. I involuntarily looked at the door camera display and saw 2 people outside the door. My heart started pounding when I realized it was the police. The doorbell rang again, forcing me to get up and open the door. "Who are you? You both look like cops," I asked. The man replied, "I'm Detective Asper." "This is Detective Logan," the woman said, showing off her badges. I made a hesitant expression. "Is that Linda? Has he offended her?" I asked anxiously. "No, she wasn't physically hurt, but Mr. Stevens was attacked," they explained. "Can we go inside?" I invited them in. "Where's Linda? Did you take her with you?" I asked. The white detective replied, "No, she's in the hospital being treated for shock." I paused for a moment, meeting their gaze. "Have a seat," I invited them. I gestured to the sofa, but they were both sitting on separate hard-backed chairs, so I settled on the sofa myself. "You have to explain what happened," I insisted. "What have you been doing since your wife left the club with Stevens?" Logan asked again. "Just tell me the truth," Asper demanded. "I went back to our hotel room, packed my things, checked out, and ended up here," I confessed. "I ended up completely drunk on this couch." "You woke me up from a dream," I replied. "Is there anyone else here?" the detective asked. "No, the kids stayed with the babysitter overnight," I replied. "Have you contacted anyone? Have you sent a message to anyone to show that you are here?" Asper asked. "No, I didn't leave," I replied. Asper looked around the room. "I noticed that you have a security system. What does it include?" he asked. "It protects all the doors. I suppose I can demonstrate my presence here. Shall we go upstairs?" I suggested. They escorted me to an upstairs office where I sat down at a computer desk. After showing them the system, I uploaded the data from 6 o'clock in the evening until their arrival. While they were watching what was happening, I gave them a brief overview and showed that the system is configured to control all 3 doors: the front, side, and sliding patio doors leading to the pool. The side where there was no door faced the forest and had 2 large windows that were closed, making it a blind spot for observation. "We will have to take this computer with us," I was informed. Logan explained, "Because if you had intervened, everything could have been hacked before we arrived." "Okay," I replied, "but I can't lend you my computer for more than a day. I need it for work." Logan reassured me. "I have a replacement, but it won't be as reliable. Believe me, I will transfer everything to this external drive, including what you need." Logan successfully completed the task, allowing the others to explore the area and at the same time emphasizing the importance of staying together. They took some pictures and left. The time was 7:10 a.m. I contacted Linda's parents, John and Stephanie, who lived next door but were now at their lake house. I told them about the situation and that according to the police, Linda is in the hospital in a state of shock. John was shocked by Linda's action, and Stephanie seemed less surprised. Stephanie asked, "Are you going to visit her?" "I'm sorry, but that's the reason I came to you. I'm not interested in talking to her after what she did. It's unfortunate that the man was attacked, but it's not my responsibility. It seems that he already has experience of such behavior. When she gets out of the hospital, she has to stay away from me and the house. We can arrange for her things to be moved," I said. John replied, "Why don't you find a new place to live? She can't stay here. The children grew up in this house. This is my place, not the property acquired during our marriage," I replied. John, the lawyer, had to try to resolve the situation. All that remained was to wait. "It's pretty cruel, Tom," he said. "Not as cruel as what she did to me," I replied, and the conversation came to an end. After that, I called my parents in Florida to explain the situation as best I could. They were also shocked by Linda's behavior. My dad turned on the TV and said there was news about Stevens. Apparently, he was attacked and died in his house. This news did not come as a surprise to me. At that moment, the phone rang. The landline phone rang, and Judy's voice came on the line. "Tom, where's Linda? We heard that Mark is dead." Tom's voice was cold and distant. "She is in a state of shock in the hospital, as the police told me. Have you seen her? Which hospital is she in? Judy's concern was obvious. I don't know. I'm not going to visit her, I replied callously. Don't do that. She needs your support, Judy pleaded. I chuckled mockingly. She will never get any support from me. I don't care if her big night was ruined. I'm going to visit her, Judy declared. You're a pig. Did you attack Mark? She spoke. No, but I don't regret it. There was bitterness and anger in my voice. Goodbye, Judy said and ended the conversation. After taking a shower and tidying up, I went to the babysitter to pick up the kids. It was already 8 o'clock. To my surprise, the babysitter was not informed of our plans for the evening. When we got home, the kids asked about Linda. I told them that she would not be joining us today as she had other things to do. We decided to spend the day usefully without her and prepare for the football match. I took the children to the football complex for games at noon, and at 1:30 p.m. I felt pretty calm watching the girls play. Michelle, the youngest, was very sweet, and Laura, although not so friendly, put in a lot of effort. It was a good workout for both of them. After the game, we ate ice cream and went home. After checking my mobile phone, I saw that there were several messages waiting for me. I didn't turn off the sound while I was spending time with the girls. One message was from Linda's parents. They informed me that she was unconscious at St. Jude's Hospital. The other was from a doctor at the hospital who asked me to call them. The last message was from Judy. She informed me that Linda is currently at the police station and refuses to talk to anyone. After advising me to stay calm, she offered to bring the girls to her. I informed the girls that their mother was in the hospital, not physically injured but emotionally upset because of the incident that happened the night before. They were interested to know what had happened, and I reluctantly revealed the truth. The night before, their mother went to the house of a famous football player to have an intimate relationship. It seemed to me that it was better to let them find out about it from me. Later, the football player was attacked, but it wasn't the woman they thought it was. She must have run into the attacker because she is now in the hospital in a state of shock. The girls hesitated to visit her, but I convinced them to pack up, and we went to the hospital. I contacted the doctor, Laura Thompson, who informed me that Linda was in poor condition and was in a catatonic state. When I asked if it was possible to bring the children to her, the doctor hesitated. Then she asked if I was going to visit Linda. I confessed that I didn't want to see her at all. I suppose you understand the situation, but I can take the girls with me if you think it might be useful, I said. Have they been informed of the details of the incident? The doctor asked. Do you mean the intimate relationship between Linda and the football player? Yes, I brought them up to date. They are aware and ready to accompany me if it helps Linda, I replied. Okay, let's meet in room 311 in half an hour, she suggested. We went into the indicated room where we ran into Dr. Thompson, a psychiatrist in his 40s. After our conversation, she turned to the girls. She informed them that their mother was in a state of shock and seemed disoriented. She suggested that meeting the girls might be useful. With some trepidation, the girls agreed. I walked them to the door and looked into the room. Linda was sitting on the bed, fixated on the cartoons that were being shown on TV. The girls timidly approached her. The eldest, Laura, reached out and gently touched her hand, calling her Mom. Michelle followed suit, but Linda didn't react in any way. Michelle started crying. When I approached her, I hugged her and looked at Linda, who remained impassive. Taking Laura by the hand, I led them to the exit. We did everything we could. I said, "Will she ever wake up?" Laura asked. "Of course, someday," I assured her. "Perhaps you will be able to visit her again soon when she comes to her senses. But what if she never wakes up?" Michelle's voice was trembling. "She'll wake up. I believe that," I replied confidently. "This may not happen soon." The doctor assured the girls that he would inform them when she regained consciousness. When we drove away from the hospital, both girls were in tears. I couldn't help but doubt my decision to take them with me. I just wanted to visit Linda and hope that their presence would calm her down a little. Despite my initial anger at her infidelity, I never wished that on her. I felt guilty for my reaction, although it deserved certain consequences, but not to this extent. Tears streamed down my face as I led them to the kitchen where I was cooking scrambled eggs and toast. I pretended that I needed their help, knowing that if I gave them the opportunity to control the situation, they would become more compliant. After arranging a movie for them, I retired to my office to call a friend who was an experienced public defender. I was hoping he could shed some light on what was going on at the Stevens house after I left. Despite his abilities, he informed me that getting police reports would not be easy, but then a revelation dawned on him. There were reports on the mileage of ambulances in the public domain. I asked him to look into it, and we ended the conversation. I settled down in the living room and watched a movie, thinking about the possible consequences. An hour later, my lawyer friend called me back. He informed me that he had sent me details about the ambulance call. I informed him about the unexpected visit of the police. He assured me that if the security system is not showing any activity, then I probably have nothing to fear. He also mentioned that the police might get a search warrant or want to talk to me again if necessary. He advised seeking the help of a lawyer. Although at first I didn't think I needed a lawyer, I decided to contact him after I read the ambulance report. The police found Linda next to Stevens, covered in blood and wearing only a thin robe. In her frustrated feelings, she repeated, "No, no, no." The police helped her get into an ambulance because she did not react to what was happening. During transportation to the hospital, a policeman rode next to her and asked if she had seen who committed the crime, but she did not answer. The lack of reaction upset me and raised fears for her recovery. I had already researched post-traumatic stress disorder to understand its essence. I studied the catatonic state caused by shock and found that although people usually recover, they can continue to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder for a long period. Joan Drake, a lawyer, made an appointment for me at 9:30 on Monday morning and gave me her mobile phone number in case the police arrived earlier, which in the end did not happen. On Sunday, the girls and I spent the day fooling around and trying to assure them that Linda would be back and would still need our support. Personally, I couldn't help but wonder what her reaction to me would be after she returned. I was sure she hadn't seen anything special, and if she had, it was most likely a man in all black and wearing a mask. But there was still the uncertainty that she might suspect me of some kind of misconduct. I just didn't know for sure. I did not believe that she knew in advance about my possibilities to commit the act that I had committed. On Monday, as usual, I drove the girls to school and closely followed the local news reports about what happened to Stevens. Although Linda's name was not specifically mentioned, it was reported that Stevens was in the company of a married woman when he was attacked near his home. The police were alerted by a neighbor who heard Linda's screams for help. Until this moment, I never thought that Linda would suspect me of such a disgusting act. No one but the authorities connected Linda and me to this crime, but I had a feeling that things would change soon. Joan Drake, a stylish blonde in her 40s, looked nervous, just like my friend said. I told her the whole story from the beginning and handed her a copy of the ambulance report. She was stunned and looked at me in disbelief. I met her gaze and calmly informed her that the police had received a copy of the CCTV footage. When I returned home, I found that no one had entered or left the house before the police arrived. I asked the interlocutor to return my computer to me, as I needed it for work. After I paid the advance, I heard her calling the police station and talking to Detective Asper. "Hello, Detective," she said. "This is Joan Drake. I'm calling about Tom. I want to know if I can get his work computer back." The answer was a simple no. "I suppose you've had enough time to check out the possible options," she said. As expected, there were none. "I'll have someone come and get it from you tomorrow morning," I suggested. "Don't worry. I'll get someone from the office to handle it," the detective replied. But I intervened, volunteering to take over the case myself. She nodded in agreement, confirming that I would do it. After finishing the conversation, I assured her that I would not talk to the authorities and would keep my phone handy to record all conversations if necessary. With that, I left. After lunch, when the girls returned from school, they immediately inquired about Linda's condition. I informed them that I had already contacted the doctor, but unfortunately, there were no noticeable improvements. They focused on doing their homework, after which we decided to order pizza for dinner. Jokingly, I said that if their mom didn't come back soon, then I would have to improve my cooking skills. This made the girls laugh, because they knew that I had never cooked at home before. Later, when Laura's sister came upstairs, Laura surprised me by asking if I could forgive their mother for her infidelity. I hesitated, not knowing what to say. All I wanted at that moment was for my wife to get better. But then my thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the landline phone. "Mr. Jude, this is Jim Bima from the Tribune newspaper," he said. "We have information that your wife Linda was with Mark Stevens when the attack was carried out. Can you confirm this? We want to avoid a possible public outcry." My heart sank at the mention of my wife's involvement. I couldn't accept the idea that this new news could affect my children. "I'm not sure," I stuttered, trying to make sense of the information I received. "Please, let's keep this between us for now. Do you confirm this? How do you feel about the death of your wife's lover?" The reporter asked. "I understand your hint. If even one of the materials you have published harms my family, I will sue you and your newspaper," I replied angrily. "It will be known, Mr. Jude." "There's nothing I can do to stop it," he said. Looking out the window, I saw a TV company truck parked outside the house. It belonged to Channel 7, I noticed. "I see a truck with a TV. You were right." "Dan, I'm sorry, but I have to go," I said. There was a knock on the door. When I looked into the camera, my gaze fell on a young woman with a microphone in her hands. Without hesitation, I spoke decisively into the intercom, ordering her to leave. It was private property, not a place for unauthorized visitors. I threatened to involve the authorities if she refused to comply. "Is your wife here, Mr. Jude?" Annoyed by the intrusion, I quickly contacted the local police department to get help in removing the press from my territory. They arrived quickly and led a group of 6 people off the porch, but my relief was short-lived when I noticed that 4 more trucks had pulled up to the house. Feeling depressed, I decided to consult a doctor for advice on what to do in this situation. I instructed her to ensure Linda's safety until the media arrived. I talked to the girls and suggested that they stay with me and study at home, but they insisted on continuing to attend school, even if they had to live elsewhere. I promised to take their wishes into account. I asked my lawyer Joan for advice, and she offered to make a statement to the press to defuse the situation. We agreed to take advantage of her offer. In a statement released by her office, it says that my family would like her to be able to continue with her normal business. It stresses that I will not respond to any rumors concerning my wife either now or in the future. The statement warns that any further media presence near our house that could harm the family will be prosecuted and requests that the space be cleared of trucks. At that time, Detective Asper and her boss announced a press conference scheduled for 7:00 in the evening. Police said Mark Stevens was fatally attacked with a sharp object near his home. Despite the fact that there was a woman in the house at the time of the incident, there is no indication that she witnessed the attack. The investigation of this case is ongoing. Detectives are investigating whether the woman is married and whether her husband could be a potential suspect. Detective Asper stated, "Given that her name is known to the public, it can be assumed that she is married. But as part of our investigation, we have thoroughly checked her husband. There is no evidence linking him to the attack. It looks like he was at home all night, far from the scene of the accident." A reporter asked if married women and their husbands were involved. "We have verified the allegations that Mr. Stevens frequently harassed married women and have concluded that these allegations are not unfounded," the detective replied. "Several married women were taken away by him in front of their husbands, which forced us to conduct an additional investigation." Chief Johnson abruptly ended the meeting, saying that there was nothing more to discuss at the moment. If there is any news before Wednesday's briefing, we will be notified." The police quickly left when the room was filled with screams. I have arranged with the girls' school to have their assignments sent here or transmitted over the internet in the coming days. I also warned Linda's parents about the media attention. Although no one has arrived yet, they also disappeared from our neighborhood. The following Tuesday, the doctor called and said that Linda was beginning to show signs of improvement and that the authorities were on her side. I quickly informed her parents, who immediately gathered the girls to take them to the hospital. Upon arriving at the scene, we saw that the police were already leaving. Detective Asper said she would like to talk to me after meeting with Linda, to which I agreed. Linda still seemed to be in a daze, even though she greeted the girls with a smile and hugged them. She avoided looking me in the eye. The girls told her about TV shows in school, but Linda soon fell asleep. The doctor advised her to rest, so the parents chatted with the girls outside, and I went to talk to Detective Asper. "Her condition seems to be improving," Asper commented. "Maybe, but I'm not really sure." I asked if they planned to take her home as soon as she regained consciousness, and Asper offered to give her time to recover. "I think she could use a break," he advised. "What consequences can she expect other than what happened?" "It's not about the consequences, but about honor and trust. I will never trust or respect her. And maybe she'll never respect me either," I replied. Asper chuckled. "She may be afraid of you. She may not trust you," he suggested. "You're just trying to trap me. You know that I did not take part in the attack on Stevens," I replied. "I am aware of your military background," Asper concluded. "I knew about your impressive reputation in the service, so maybe an ordinary person couldn't do it. But I believe you can," he said. "But I did not commit this act," I repeated. "We have surveillance footage from the Stevens house for security purposes," Asper shared. "It doesn't concern me. I wasn't there at the time." "Goodbye," I replied. The statement looked threatening. In the following days, Linda gradually returned to her usual routine. I continued to drop the girls off daily, but I didn't stay with them in the ward. Linda's discharge was scheduled for the 4th day. She asked to speak to me alone, and I escorted the girls out of the room. "I'm sorry for putting you in such an awkward position," she apologized. I knew that her apologies would not change the situation. The humiliation of having these events featured on the national news was too much for her. "I just want to go home when I'm discharged this afternoon," she said, sitting down on the bed and looking towards the armchair. "Can I go home knowing that the media is watching us? I cannot accept that the girls' lives will be even more overshadowed. Maybe I'll find a way to escape unnoticed," she suggested. While I was silently looking at her, she did not take her eyes off the ground. "You've always managed to slip away," I said. Without raising her head, she replied, "I'll alert the guards." Reluctantly, I admitted, "I might not want to be around you, but circumstances don't seem to leave me a choice. My main task is to protect you from harm. I believed in your love for me and your strength to stand up. Or so it seemed to me," I said. "I didn't think about it." "Did you make love?" I asked. "No," she replied. "We were both naked in bed when the chaos started." I studied her carefully and realized that she was not telling the truth. "I do not know if I can trust you anymore," I confessed. "I can't trust you anymore." We both sat in silence, not knowing what to do next. "Okay," she finally said. "I love you." I didn't say anything. I just got up and left. I contacted hospital security to arrange transportation for Linda so she could come home with me. The car picked her up at 4:00 p.m., and she got home safely around 4:45 p.m. Upon arriving home, my children and her parents were waiting for me. I made a bed in my office, and Linda slept in our room. The rest of the day passed awkwardly while her parents tried to navigate an unfamiliar situation. The children were passionate about playing Monopoly in the living room. When her father wanted to talk, we moved to the patio. John asked, "What are your plans, Tom?" I replied, "I'm not sure, but it looks like it's over. You have to try to forgive." You have loved each other for so long, and you have a wonderful family. I nodded. I know, but I can't help but wonder if our love really lasted all these years. If she really loved me, she wouldn't have done that. Even if she claims that they did not have sexual intercourse, I can't say for sure. She spent a significant amount of time with him. I continued. Is it important? Her father asked. Most likely she was ready for this. It's obvious, I replied. But things could have turned out differently if I hadn't taken precautions. She could have been sick or pregnant. This possibility did not suit him. She can stay here for now, but perhaps in the near future, it is worth thinking about alternative options. We went back inside and ate pizza together. Her parents went home. As far as I know, they didn't tell her about Brian. While we were putting the girls to bed, Laura asked Linda about why she had an intimate relationship with Mark. I'm sorry. I made a mistake, and I was wrong. But I'm at a loss. He's just a football player. I was watching him. Linda defended herself. Is he not our father? The children asked. No, not your father. I will talk to you about him later when I have more information, she replied. After the girls fell asleep, Linda went downstairs to the kitchen. I followed her about 10 minutes after that. While I was waiting, I called my friend who works as a public defender and asked about the autopsy report. He said it was a public document, and I asked him to get it if possible. Linda decided to drink Pepsi instead of alcohol, as it was not recommended due to the risk of relapse. She asked if I was staying in our room, to which I replied that I would sleep in the study. I assured her that she could come at any time. Right now, I'm not sure about the future of our relationship, given everything that has happened this week. I went to my office and got into bed. My sleep was restless, and I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Having brewed fresh coffee, my friend sent me a copy of Stevens's autopsy report. I studied it carefully, focusing on assessing the damage, which showed traces of ejaculate and female secretions. The samples were sent to the laboratory for further analysis. Obviously, Linda wasn't being truthful about their intimate contact. I've always doubted it because of the time she was there for about 2 hours before the crime occurred. After she finally came downstairs, I took the girls to school, trying to make everything as casual as possible, but they looked a little depressed. I've been weighing my options for a long time. If it wasn't for Linda's illness, I would never have allowed her to return to the house. But there were also advantages to letting her stay. For example, it was possible to make life easier for the girls if the situation improved. When I got home, a TV truck pulled up, and a young woman got out and started yelling at me about Linda and whether I had forgiven her. I just smiled, waved, and warned her not to enter our territory. Inside, Linda greeted me with freshly baked cookies, which I gladly accepted. When we sat down at the table to enjoy the treat, I couldn't help but notice another TV truck parked on the street. I couldn't help but wonder what they needed. They have already revealed my name and my actions in his house. Can they cause even more harm? I looked at her, considering our next steps as a couple. I need you to document what happened last Friday, starting from the moment the idiot approached us and ending with how you were hospitalized. Take your time, but please do it quickly if you can. If it's too painful, feel free to skip this part and come back to it later. I will do my best to deal with it, I said. Why should they care about my cheating? I haven't been home for a week, Linda asked. She took sick leave for this and next week to give herself time to rest at home. I went to see her when she was sitting at her desk in the bedroom and typing on the computer. I decided to leave her alone and went to my office to focus on studying the autopsy materials. I knew I'd get the test results eventually, but it would take a few days. It was noticeable that Linda was trying to behave normally around me. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that she had questions about the events that had happened. For the next 2 days, our daily life went on as usual until I finally got the test results. The DNA and sexual fluids found belonged to Linda, which indicated that she most likely lied about her intimate contacts. I was anxiously waiting for her to answer this question, but I couldn't imagine how to continue living in our marriage. In the evening, Linda came into my home office when I was finishing work. She handed me the text of the printout. When I read her words, my heart sank. "Tom, please forgive me for a moment of weakness," she wrote. She went on to describe how Mark asked her to dance and how she couldn't resist his charm and reputation. The way he held her during the slow dance made her feel powerless, and she admitted that she would have given in to him then and there. She couldn't explain why he seemed so irresistible to her, but the truth was undeniable. He told me to leave unnoticed through a side exit and promised to take me to his house. He assured me that I would have the most incredible intimate contact of my life. I believed his words. After the dance was over, I turned to our table and found that you were not there. I agreed to accompany June to the women's bathroom. When you came back, I noticed that you were visibly upset. I thought that you would calm down with time, but the desire to get Mark overcame all my fears. I went out the side door, and we drove to his house. As soon as we entered the house, he kissed me passionately. I was knocked down when he carried me to his bed. Our lovemaking was intense and passionate, but when we reached the peak of pleasure, a sudden sound ruined the moment. A car alarm howled outside. He quickly put on a robe and rushed out into the street, telling me to stay where I was. Looking out the window, I saw a shadowy figure in black clothes disappear, jumping over the fence. Worried, I grabbed my robe and hurried downstairs to find Mark lying on the driveway. In shock and horror, I knelt down next to him, my heart pounding with fear and confusion. I was in a daze, completely shocked and discouraged. I couldn't get rid of the guilt, as if I was guilty of a perfect sin. The police arrived, and the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. I am truly sorry for everything that has happened. I love you, and I can't explain why I did what I did. Linda's tear-stained face loomed over me as she said, "I spent the whole night drowning in my grief, mourning the end of my marriage and the inevitable changes in my family. I hated you, but the police inevitably informed you of my presence. They have surveillance footage as evidence. When I asked, they only said that I think Stephen got what he deserved." I told Linda, "No, Tom, he didn't deserve what happened to him." "He was a good man," she replied. "Didn't he ruin our lives?" I asked. "Tom, please stop." She began to defend herself. "Why should I do this? I need you to understand that I will never have the same feelings for you again. Maybe I won't be able to love you at all." I interrupted her. "The woman you married would never have done what you did. Was it worth it?" I asked. "Was the fleeting pleasure of an affair worth the irreversible consequences? What have I lost? Maybe the pleasure of making love was exciting, but the price was too high. If it was a one-night stand, and you could come home the next day, maybe. But now he's gone, and I'll have to deal with the consequences for the rest of my life." I said angrily. "Yes, you attacked him," she exclaimed, turned around, and ran out of the room. "No, you brought him to this," I whispered to myself. And that was the end of it. Our bond has turned icy. I decided not to make excuses or ask her for forgiveness. I refused to tell her what really happened. I was afraid that if I did, she would immediately report me to the authorities. She was the kind of person I couldn't rely on. She mentioned that if Stephen hadn't died, this night would have been worth the consequences. Maybe not directly, but still. A couple of weeks later, she and I started the divorce process. I asked for custody of the children so they could stay in the family home. Despite the fact that Linda was still working, I did not demand alimony, child support, or unlimited dates. When Linda's health improved, I found it necessary for her to find a place to live. She decided to temporarily stay with her parents. I personally delivered the legal documents to her at their house. Shortly after that, I was contacted by her father, who expressed a desire that I take the documents since Linda is in a state of despair. I was firmly convinced that Linda needed to go to a lawyer and resolve the situation properly. Although her father was upset, I didn't know who his anger was directed at. He asked me how the dates were going, and I informed him that she could come any night and stay until the children fell asleep. Linda arrived the next day at 5 o'clock in the evening. I made macaroni and cheese for dinner, and we enjoyed eating with the girls. Before putting them to bed, we played board games with them. After that, Linda expressed a desire to talk, but I was not up to it. "We have to deal with this, Tom. It won't do the girls any good if we live separately," she said. "They'll have to adapt," I replied. "You can find a place where we can meet to discuss this. The sooner we get divorced, the sooner we can arrange dates," I said. "I really don't want this divorce. I know I've ruined everything. It was a huge mistake, but I still love you," she replied. "We can't stay married after you cheated on me. Let's just forget about it," I said. Linda started crying. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her, but it wasn't enough to influence my decision. "We're done," I told her. When the divorce was finalized, we managed to agree on joint custody of the girls, and Linda found an apartment for them with a spacious second bedroom. Our relationship became remotely friendly, and we focused on the well-being of our daughters. About 4 months later, I started dating again. A rumor spread among our friends and colleagues that I was single, and it seemed that I was attracting the attention of women from our social circle and from work. I invited many women to my house for the night, but the relationships did not last long with any of them. Despite this, the physical intimacy we shared was often satisfying, and sometimes exceptional. I deliberately tried to avoid communicating with married women, although some of them showed interest in me. After reflecting on my actions, I came to the conclusion that it was morally wrong. Linda, on the other hand, struggled with her personal problems. To cope with them, she took antidepressants and often slept to escape from her problems. Despite the difficulties, she managed to carry out her work duties and assignments. Family and friends have confirmed that she is not currently dating anyone. 10 years later, Laura left for college, and Michelle was preparing for her first year. Joint custody had become familiar to them, and they had adapted well. Both girls dated guys already in high school, and Laura continued to do so in college. Meanwhile, I was in a serious relationship with Cody, a woman I met at a bar. Like me, she was divorced, had 2 children, and her ex-husband lived on the West Coast. At the age of 35, she combined work and taking care of children who went to school. After they left for college, she moved in with me. I was in love with her. She had a great sense of humor, she was smart, and our physical relationship was satisfying. She might not have been as stunning as Linda, but she had a certain charm that attracted the attention of other men when we were together. At the very beginning of our relationship, I told her about the controversy surrounding the mysterious death of Mark Stevens, but I never revealed the details of how he died. In the end, the hype subsided, and no one was ever brought to justice. One Saturday, Detective Logan suddenly appeared on my doorstep, and I invited him in. He was single and had recently retired. I congratulated him on a good pension, but then asked about the case from 10 years ago. He confessed that he always thought that I had dealt with that idiot, and although he may have deserved it, not my wife. I denied my involvement, but agreed that the man deserved his fate. I praised the one who did it. When I asked why he thought Linda didn't deserve it, he simply replied, "Well, it was just one night." Like many other married women, she could just shrug off this fool's advances. If they had tried to keep their affair inconspicuous, maybe I wouldn't have paid attention to it, but their behavior was too audacious and demonstrative. I replied. "How's your partner doing?" I asked, changing the subject. "She's already a captain and a pretty grumpy woman," he remarked. We exchanged pleasantries, and he left. As for Linda, she gradually began to come to her senses. While I was driving Michelle to school, we talked about her life on the way back. I asked how she was doing. She replied, "I'm fine. I have a boyfriend. This is something like a friend with privileges. I know that you and Cody are together." I nodded in agreement. "Yes, we are together," I said. Michelle whispered, "I wish none of this had happened. I expressed my regret, and we both shed tears. As I learned from my good friend, Linda was dating an older man, but it infuriated me when I found out that this man was married. I hated Linda for that. She ruined our marriage, and now she wanted to ruin another one. Are there really no free men left? I couldn't leave it like that, and found out the wife of Linda's lover and told her everything. Anna turned out to be a pleasant woman and was very upset when she learned the bad news from me. Later, I found out that Linda had an accident and was in bad condition in the hospital. She was hit by a car, and the culprit has not yet been found. I can guess who organized it, but it's none of my business. Maybe this time Linda realized that it's not worth getting into someone else's pants. Story 3. There were 20,000 female students at my alma mater, Temple University. Among them, Diana, my future wife, stood out as one of the 3 most stunning women on campus. One afternoon, 3 goddesses gathered in the cafeteria, attracting the attention of every guy in the room. I went up to them and asked if I could sketch their portraits. Sally, one of the girls I knew from our study group, was there, but I didn't recognize the other 2. "Don't you have anything to do?" Diana, a tall brunette, asked me. I took her hand and replied, "No, there's nothing." Then she challenged me, saying, "Well, then your sketch should be good." I assured her, "Of course it will be good. You 3 ladies inspire me." Diana, the owner of an amazing 10, was the most beautiful girl I've ever met, and the rest had 6 or higher scores. At first, Diana showed no interest in me until Sally, one of the other beauties, looked at the drawing I had drawn and bit into my lips with a passionate kiss. Then she winked at me, indicating her intentions. Diana, noticing this exchange, looked at the sketch and responded with an equally passionate kiss, looking triumphantly at Sally. "You are very talented," Diana praised me. Sally winked again and surreptitiously pointed at Diana behind her back. Sally knew about my interest in Diana and knew exactly how to arouse Diana's interest in me. It seemed like Sally wanted to make Diana jealous as she kissed me before she left. Then Diana surprised me by grabbing my hand and remarking that if Sally was interested in me, then I must be someone special. When I said I didn't have a girlfriend, Diana said I had one now, and we've been together ever since. Despite Diana's quirky and impulsive nature, I couldn't help but feel grateful that she found me intriguing enough to continue the relationship. Now, this sketch hangs on the wall of our living room among many others depicting my wife and children. I no longer do sketches by hand. Instead, I use a computer and have a good command of technology. At first, my wife was perplexed about what she saw in me, but I soon realized that she was especially harsh towards those who tried to communicate with her. It was only years later that I found out that she belongs to the autistic spectrum. Namely, she is diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Even though I knew I wasn't her first preference, I was the only one who could tolerate her occasional insults, waving them off with humor. Despite the fact that she insulted all the guys who were interested in her and didn't understand why they were leaving her. We started dating at 18, got married at 21, and had our first child at 24. We moved to Los Angeles by the age of 26. My wife had a tendency not to say more than she needed to because she understood that most of her words were unintentional insults that she had difficulty controlling. It wasn't until we got married that I realized she was also struggling with depression. She often had prolonged bouts of crying that lasted for hours. I comforted her by hugging her and assuring her of my love for her and our children, which sometimes helped ease her pain. A wiser person might have decided to leave her in such circumstances, but my love for her and our children was too strong for me to leave them. Although some children can succeed after their parents divorce, I have not yet seen such cases. It's worth noting that she was not only the most beautiful woman I've ever met, but also the most beautiful woman I've ever known. There were nights when I didn't sleep, admiring her beauty and feeling grateful to heaven for blessing me with such an amazing wife. Perhaps it can be considered superficial, but it was a sincere expression of my love and admiration for her. I found that the harder she worked, the happier she became, whereas for me it was the other way around. Together, we founded a thriving advertising agency in our senior year. I focused on the creative aspects, and my wife did the rest. Our partnership has been incredibly successful. Having bought a house in a transitional area with a risky reputation for a song, we devoted years and every extra penny to its repair. We added a media room and a weightlifting gym, which I used almost daily to stay in shape. To keep my wife, I had to be with her all the time because men were constantly pestering her. We spent all our time together, working and living under the same roof, and I treasured every moment. Diana had a hard time making and maintaining friendships, and I did my best to be her constant companion. Suddenly, 25 years have passed, and our third child was born. But then everything changed for the worse, taking me by surprise. My wife's life was changing, and one day, with tears in her eyes, she confessed to me that men no longer paid attention to her and did not flirt with her as before. She longed for the worries and experiences that she had missed, feeling a deep need for them every day. Looking at herself in the mirror and seeing the wrinkles on her face, she cried. Despite my assurances that she was still beautiful to me, she complained that we got married at such a young age, believing that she had missed out on so many joys in life. I reminded her that she had also avoided heartache and the potential health risks of dating and relationships. My wife has always been faithful to me despite the advances of other men, and her loyalty has served as a source of strength for my mental well-being. Everything changed when my wife struck up a friendship with Carol, the woman with whom we drove to our youngest son's elementary school. I was thrilled that my wife had found a friend, especially since Carol was a real estate agent. But I didn't know that Carol's husband, Barry, was a divorce lawyer who used his wife to ruin the marriages of women she was friends with. In return, Carol received a listing and commission for the sale of divorced women's homes. My wife kept repeating Carol's claims, constantly making comparisons between me and rich and successful Barry. She began to criticize me for working hard and earning little, despite the fact that I spent extra hours to support our two older children at Ivy League colleges. After paying for their education, we had very little money left, but the value of our house had skyrocketed and was now almost $2 million. Diana kept pointing out that Carol's husband could afford to buy her a Mercedes. They had a vacation home in Carmel, and they traveled a lot. It was terrible to feel inferior to my wife. I devoted 25 years to her happiness, and then I realized that she didn't give a damn about it. To make matters worse, she started going on dates with her friend Carol every Saturday night. During the first date, my wife, who suffers from Asperger's syndrome and has difficulty perceiving social cues, found out that Carol thinks Diana deserves someone better than me. Despite my resentment and disappointment, I remained silent and kept my suspicions to myself. I borrowed my friend's car and followed them for the next walk. As a result, they ended up at a club where they met a very attractive young friend of Carol's. He danced with my wife all night, making me angry and jealous. Instead of confronting them, I took some pictures and waited by my wife's car in the parking lot. If she had left with him, I was ready to confront and maybe fight with him. But fortunately, my wife and Carol left without him. With difficulty controlling my emotions, I quickly developed a plan. Fighting the mental pain and rage, I ran home before my wife and made a kettle for both of us. When she talked about her evening and admitted that she had danced with several men, I felt deceived. While remaining vigilant, I carefully observed her behavior. Flirting with another man seemed to ignite a passionate desire in her, and she continued to shower me with caresses all night long, leaving me completely delighted with her intensity. Throughout the week, she could be found in the backyard, quietly talking on her cell phone. I noticed some questionable purchases in our credit card account, and it turned out that she was buying risky-style clothes that she was hiding from me. When the weekend came, she couldn't go to her usual baccalaureate party because of car problems. I secretly disconnected the battery. I hoped that this forced stay at home would help her to distance herself from another man. Wanting to improve our relationship, I suggested that she enroll in a film course at a nearby college. I wanted to take my wife to watch films that hadn't been released yet. At first, she seemed interested, but the next day, she suddenly changed her mind. She told me that Carol advised her not to go to classes with me, saying that I was trying to manipulate her. I couldn't understand what she meant. It was complete nonsense. Despite this setback, I decided to surprise her by buying tickets to the ballet on Saturday night, knowing how much she loves it. But she declined my invitation, choosing instead to go on a date with Carol. It was becoming clear that my marriage was in serious trouble. That week, my wife and Carol decided to visit the same bar again. My wife decided to sit next to the same man as before, and I sat at a distance but still within sight. To hide my identity, I put on a wig, hat, and sunglasses. Despite the fact that my wife doesn't really like to drink, she seemed to be making up for lost time that evening. As she got more and more drunk, her companion began to molest her, his hands exploring her thighs. Instead of resisting, my wife bent down for a kiss. It became clear to me that I had to put an end to the intense attraction she felt for this other man. I was thinking that a jug of beer could solve many life problems. At the table next to us, two intoxicated men who had run out of money were still thirsty. I made them an offer. I would give them $500 to buy 2 large jugs of beer, provided they accidentally spill one of the jugs on my wife. They agreed, and soon my wife was doused with beer, ruining her expensive clothes and shoes. Enraged, she cursed at the men and ran into the ladies' room to try to dry off. After leaving the restaurant, she walked alone to her car. I walked behind, trying to keep my distance. It was obvious that she had drunk too much as she was having difficulty keeping the car in one lane. Worried about her safety and the safety of other road users, I decided to call the police and report a drunk driver. I gave them the make of her car, the license plate, and the direction she was heading down Wilshire Boulevard. The police intercepted her, caught the smell of alcohol, and arrested her for drunk driving. I let her spend the night in the drunk tank, and the next morning I bailed her out. I made sure to express my disappointment with her actions. I informed her that I would no longer help her and that the bachelorette parties were over. She agreed and claimed that I was controlling her and jealous of her friend Carol, accusing me of not wanting her to have fun. I stood my ground and told her that if she needed help, she could call Carol and ask for her help. When I was about to leave, she begged me, eventually bursting into tears and promising to end her evenings with Carol. Reluctantly, I released her from prison on bail. Although the bachelorette parties with Carol stopped, Carol continued to interfere in our marriage. She even invited us to dinner, but it was clear that there was an ulterior motive behind this invitation. She and her husband were delicately interested in my income and our net worth, as if assessing how much they could get as a result of the divorce. But they also had another motive to invite us to visit. Given my knowledge of computer graphics, they asked me to help fix their broken computer. I suggested that they continue to drink in the living room while I work in the office. After simply shutting down and turning on the computer, the problem was solved, as it often happens. Being naturally curious, I had a natural desire to delve deeper into the lives of those whom I considered opponents. It didn't take me long to discover her husband's financial records in his QuickBooks accounting program. To my shock, I discovered that for the last 5 years, he had been earning more than $500,000 a year, and in the TurboTax declaration, he reported to the tax service only about $20,000. I carefully printed out all the incriminating evidence and discreetly put it in my pocket. Underestimating my capabilities was a serious mistake. If I target you, rest assured you won't notice it, and in this case, these two people did just that. The night we left, the wheels of retribution had already begun to turn. When my wife mentioned that Carol had invited her to her vacation home in Carmel, California, for Labor Day weekend, I thought it was a great idea for her to relax a little. The next day, I decided to hire a private investigator to keep an eye on her during the trip, just in case. At the suggestion of a private investigator, I also purchased a burner phone so that in the event of a divorce, our relationship could not be easily traced. As a last gesture of disbelief, I put several dozen contraceptives in her luggage as a not too delicate message. My wife, carrying 2 heavy suitcases, tripped and fell, hitting her face on the steps and getting a black eye. The private investigator I hired followed her to her friend's house, but called me and told me that instead of Carol's friend, she had picked up a man there. They didn't go north to Carmel as I assumed, but drove 100 miles south. The man she was with turned out to be the one she was dancing with in the photo I sent to the private investigator. They found themselves in room 515 of the Laguna Beach Hotel. A private detective whispered to me about the presence of the police in a nearby hotel restaurant. He asked for my instructions. Remembering my wife's recent black eye, I told him to inform them that a woman working as an escort had been attacked in the room. I was hoping that the police would intervene before further harm was done. Shortly after that, the private investigator called and reported that my wife had been taken out of the room and arrested for molestation after her boyfriend was arrested for assault and battery. My wife called me in tears an hour later. She asked me to post bail for her release from prison, but did not give the reason for the arrest, only her location. I pretended not to understand and asked why she wasn't in Carmel, but she evaded the question. After taking a deposit of $55,000, I promised to go there, withdrawing money from our bank the next morning. But in the end, I never fulfilled my bail plan. I was hoping she would spend the entire 3-day Labor Day weekend behind bars, since the previous night in jail didn't seem to have been a lesson for her. I attended the court hearing and saw her plead guilty while in shackles and wearing an orange prison uniform. In the past, I've seen my wife experience various emotions: happiness, sadness, depression, confusion. But this was the first time I've seen her completely broken and defeated. It was clear that she had reached her lowest point. The presence of several contraceptives in her luggage was used as evidence against her, which led to a 6-month prison sentence. The sentence was postponed until she could avoid trouble for a year. To my surprise, her lawyer turned out to be Carol's husband, who also represented my wife's friend John. After conducting a little investigation, my private investigator found out that John was involved in 3 more divorces, where Carol's husband represented the interests of the wives. It became clear to me that Carol had devised a plan to bring my unsuspecting wife and John together in order to receive a commission from the sale of our $2 million house and benefit her husband. I could have made a significant amount of money representing my wife in a divorce, despite the fact that she begged me not to do so. But in the end, I decided not to file for divorce for several reasons. First of all, I loved my children and my wife, despite her depression and neurotic behavior. Secondly, I didn't want to let the lawyer and real estate agent who insisted on our separation benefit from our situation. In addition, the thought that I could lose my home, custody of my younger children, and endlessly pay alimony to my ex-wife played a role in my decision to stay married. I didn't want to trade my beautiful house for a small apartment in a rundown neighborhood. My wife realized that Carol's friendship with her was insincere and that Carol saw her as an easy target to take advantage of. I warned my wife that although some people might get away with cheating, karma would eventually catch up with her, and next time I wouldn't interfere if she ended up in jail for 6 months. I also made it clear that if she ever looked at another man, there would be consequences. I threatened to send her sketches and conviction papers to all her acquaintances, file for divorce, and have her lose custody of our children because of her history of drunk driving and being involved with escorts. I also admitted that I had periodically tracked her whereabouts both on my own and with the help of a private investigator, and promised quick and serious consequences if she ever lost her way. When I asked if I was a terrible husband, she admitted that her actions were dictated by an addiction to approval. She enjoyed the flattery and admiration of a handsome man who described her as beautiful and alluring. She found thrills in their secret date at the club and the upcoming trip to Laguna Beach, but I warned her that risky behavior could lead to consequences such as imprisonment. I mentioned that I usually behave calmly and avoid conflicts, and remembered my last fight in the 9th grade with a larger opponent, as a result of which I had a bloody nose. The only harm I did to him was stain his shirt with my blood. I'm not aggressive unless provoked, especially when it comes to protecting my family. I may not always win, but I never back down. I turned over Barry's tax documents to the Federal Office of Internal Revenue in California, a franchise tax office. They mentioned a possible reward if the information turned out to be correct. My revenge on him was far from over. Tax evasion is considered a serious offense and can lead to professionals, such as lawyers or real estate agents, losing their licenses to practice. The last 2 meetings that day were scheduled at the Real Estate Commission and the California State Bar Association office, where I discussed Barry and Carol's financial performance and tax returns. The tax office's forensic accountant discovered that Barry had also embezzled his client's money. Despite this, the State Bar seemed unconcerned that Barry was paying a gigolo to ruin marriages. I made it clear that Barry's actions were disgusting and had a detrimental effect on families. They looked at me with disdain, as if I naively believed that they would show at least some care. In a fit of anger, I muttered to myself, calling them low-level lawyers. I realized that this insult was unnecessary. What else can you expect from a lawyer? When I left, I didn't know that a few months later I would be happy to read an article in the newspaper that Barry, a well-known divorce lawyer in the district, had been stripped of his license and charged with tax evasion. It turned out that Barry and his partner Carol owed the IRS and the franchise tax office more than $1 million. Authorities found more than $400,000 in unregistered cash hidden in his home safe. Barry was sentenced to 2 years in prison, as a result of which his house and cars were confiscated to repay unpaid taxes. I managed to buy his wife's Mercedes-Benz at a bargain price at an auction of the tax service. I joked with my wife that it seems that living luxuriously like Barry and Carol is easier if you avoid paying taxes. Compared to them, I felt like a loser because I had much less money due to the fact that I followed the rules and paid taxes. But after a year, I was able to pay off my taxes in full after receiving a reward of $440,000 from the tax service. I decided to spend the money on a luxury trip to Tahiti with my wife. During the time we spent there, we were able to mend our relationship and get everything back to normal. Carol now works as an overweight cashier at our local supermarket. Whenever I see her at the checkout, I can't help but smile and feel a sense of satisfaction. I also make sure to get behind the wheel of her old car to remind her of our past. She and her husband never found out how the IRS caught up with them. Karma can be tough, but sometimes it takes a little push to fix everything. 10 years have passed since that incident. It took a year and a trip to Tahiti for our relationship to fully recover, but since then, my wife has realized her mistake and now, like Johnny Cash, remains loyal and devoted.